Welcome to Rebel Health Radio, bringing the best in alternative and integrative medicine to your ears.
Hello everyone, it's Patricia Warby of Alchemy Therapies here, and I want to talk today about psychosensory tools for healing. Now, I've touched on this in a few videos before. I've talked about some that I use and some that I'm aware of, some that I wrote about in the book The Scar That Won't Heal, which looked at the impact of unconscious emotional trauma on the symptomology, the symptoms you experience in adult life. And we saw not only that there is a massive correlation because of the way the body interprets stuck emotions in talking to your unconscious back brain and producing a stress response. And I talked about that in my video on the cell danger response, which looks at the cellular impact of stress. But I've also covered many of the kind of neuroscientific viewpoints as to how this works. But today I want to kind of bring it all together. And I also want to maybe end on a challenging note, because I'm very aware that there is a bit of a battle going on in this field. And in many ways, it mirrors my own journey, because I came from a very strict scientific background. You know, my first degree was in biochemistry with pharmacology. I then went on to study nutritional medicine as a postgrad, and finally clinical hypnotherapy. That was where I got my PhD. So I've kind of come from a very linear scientific world of things being very black and white into a much more, I don't want to say grey area, because that seems a bit dull, but uncertain and more, I guess, holistic, intuitive way of dealing with people's pain and their suffering. And so this is the conflict that's going on, I think, in the field at the moment. We've got a very dogmatic, science-based medical approach, which treats most conditions either with drug therapy, sometimes surgery if drug therapy doesn't work. And particularly in the area of mental health, there's also talk therapy, which will take you through your thinking and your beliefs, and what I call a top-down approach to kind of changing the way you conceive of yourself. Now, these are very important and necessary approaches, and they've been very well researched, because drug therapy in particular is patentable and therefore makes a lot of money for the pharmaceutical companies that develop it. Generally, there are a lot of failures, has to be said. I worked in clinical trials for a number of years, and I remember that there were many that didn't make the grade. You know, Alzheimer's particularly has proved very, very difficult to find effective drug treatments. But we have this model that everything is concrete, it's very linear, and therefore healing is based on finding the right molecular chemical that will change the biochemistry of the body to right the wrong and reverse the symptoms. So it's very, very symptom based. It's very left hemisphere, very grasping, very kind of, logical. And that's where I've come from. And then there is the much more intuitive right brain, open awareness, heart-based approach to healing, which I have come into whilst not leaving my scientific brain behind. I think we have to understand that healing is a process of working these two together. And I really think the holistic side, holism, by the way, comes from the same derivation as healing and wholeness. It's a very interesting word, but it's been very degraded over time. People tend to sort of, critique holistic therapies as being a bit unscientific, untested, and in some cases they are, it's true. But that doesn't mean they're not effective. It just means the backdrop, the kind of scientific experimentation has not been done. And that's largely because it doesn't make money. We are in a capitalist model. And so, you know, nothing that gets done, if it doesn't make money, is going to last, you know. So we have what I call the psychosensory tools for healing. And in that, I include things like EFT, or tapping, which you may have come across, where you tap on certain points on the body. Now, I was very skeptical of EFT. I'm going to be really honest with you. I came from, you know, a clinical background. No one had ever explained how that might work. They said there were, quote unquote, energy centers on the body, and not having come from a traditional Chinese medicine approach, I didn't really know what they were. I now know that there are huge nerve plexi in the head, neck, and face, which seem to correspond with the nerve endings of extreme electrosensitivity. That's the scientific explanation. Okay, so I like that because that unifies my left and right brain. I can actually understand why that might stimulate, and in particular stimulate the vagus nerve, which that you've got two, a ventral and a dorsal vagus nerve. One is more above the diaphragm, and one is more below, and that's your dorsal. And the ventral vagal is really all about orientation and safety, because developmentally a child will need to gaze at mother and be held by her and smell her, and that's what gives our bodies a sense of safety, and being held and touched, is, of course, is a vital part of that. So EFT works primarily by stimulating touch electrochemically, as does something called havening, which I talked about before, and then there's EMDR, which uses eye stimulus movements to stimulate memory, in particular traumatic or implicit memory. I talked about that last week. But what the important thing about these is that they use a bottom-up approach. So they're looking at stimulating emotional feelings related to experiences you've had in the past, which have formed the beliefs that you have about yourself, which are largely unconscious. And so I think where top-down approaches, where thinking approaches fail to reach, is that a lot of these emotions are completely unconscious. You may be very highly driven, for instance, highly successful, high achieving, as I am, and believe yourself, therefore, to have no sense of shame or negativity in you, but your unconscious process may say you'll never make it. You're just showing yourself up. You're going to fail at some point. And these unconscious beliefs are instilled from experiences you had in childhood, usually. And so there's a great deal of difference between our conscious awareness of who we are and our unconscious awareness, what we might carry inside us as the truth, if you like, of who we are. And unfortunately, these body-based sensory beliefs based on things that you learned when you were a child do tend to be much more powerful. Okay, so where I think psychosensory therapy really benefits is that it approaches it from this bottom-up awareness and seeks to change these unconscious belief systems based on memories of things that happened to you, usually attachment wounds years and years ago, sometimes even at your birth. So I like psychosensory approaches because they give a little bit more room for the spontaneity of healing. Now, healing is a process, it's not a destination. And I really want to encourage people to stop thinking of it in a linear fashion, because that's what medicine teaches. So if you've got your input and your output, and there are a series of stages along the way, and all we need to do is follow a certain set of protocols. We do certain things in a certain order and we'll get the output at the end. And that's certainly what most people believe healing is. You take a pill, you get healing, but healing is not really about that. Alleviation of symptoms may well be, but the symptoms are the output of an underlying imbalance in the system. And if we look at it that way, the alleviation of symptoms is not equated to healing. It's not the same. It's like taking, I don't know, if you've got on your dashboard, you know, a warning sign, and you just disconnect the dashboard and say, well, I've healed that, you know, that's the problem sorted. That's kind of the equivalent of what we're looking at here. And so the kinds of approaches I really like are where there's a little bit of, dare I say, magic involved. There's this strange moment where everything connects, where the belief systems, the experiences of that person, their kind of self-imposed limitations just kind of drop away or are reconfigured in some way. And you kind of see it on their face, in their posture, you see the shift. And that really isn't something that medical practice trains people in. It really makes doctors into technicians. And so that's the bit that I really encourage people to explore, is putting aside your need for always understanding what's happening. It's nice to have scientific backing for something. It gives us a little bit of understanding why something would work. And certainly neuroscience has made such rapid advances in the last couple of decades, really, because we've been able to wire up people's brains and see what's happening in real time with fMRI. So that's important for us to kind of see what's going on and understand it. But it's not everything. And in healing, there is a kind of tipping point I've found when working with people. So you change certain inputs, you change a person's diet, you change the way that they move or hold themselves, you give them stress relief tools and techniques, and then perhaps addressing the more specific memories or issues that they're carrying. And there is kind of a point at which the nervous system just seems to transform itself almost spontaneously. I can't explain that. I know that there is a tipping point in the cell danger response, for instance, in the cell where certain level of stress is tolerated or adapted to, and then over that amount, the cells go into a protective response called the cell danger response. And that, of course, is expressed physically in symptoms. So it seems very likely to me that the reverse would also be true, and that if we change the inputs to a certain level, there'll be this level above which the system can now go back to balancing itself, so can adapt again. And that's what we're looking for. Now, why do people get stuck? Mainly because their belief systems are very entrenched, they're very linked to survival, and they're very unconscious a lot of the time. People don't realize they're running them. And so I think it's really important to use a technique which helps to bring light into that situation. I mean, to illuminate what's actually going on under the hood, as it were, rather than addressing the overt, explicit awareness that most people have. And so that's what we do. That's the holistic process of healing, really. Now, can you patent that? Can you make that process the same for everybody? Can you say, okay, here's what to do, and the output will always be identical with every person? I don't really think so. I mean, capitalism, which is what we live under, would tell us, yes, if we can guarantee something, we can put our mark on it, we can obviously make money from it and make it work. But does it work for everyone? It seems not. And actually, I think it's the opposite approach to what we need. When we're coming into heart connection with someone, we need to be comfortable with uncertainty, because I can never tell when sitting down with someone how things are going to go. I'd love to be able to predict and say, yep, we just need to do it this way. And at the end of that, you'll get the result you want. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes it takes longer than we expect. Sometimes it's remarkably quick. It really is an interaction between the person, their state of mind, their energy levels, their open awareness. Some people are very shut down, and you, and how you gel, really, when you're in therapeutic connection with someone. So we have to look at this healing process as an organic phenomenon, an energetic phenomenon. I really do believe we have to do that. Some of the most disappointing therapy I've ever had are with people going through a protocol. and they are reading from a script, or they're concentrating more on what they learned rather than your presence in the room with them. And so I think, although it's good to have a scientific basis to something, it's also good to allow for an individuality in the process and this uncertainty as well. Must we tie something down so much when healing, and indeed existence, is so nebulous, is so extraordinary, is so unexpected in many, many ways, and things can come from anywhere to derail us and equally to give us joy? You know, we're never in control of external events. We're only ever in control of our response to them. And so I would never want to, for instance, trademark something that I felt I had invented, because I know that my work stands on the shoulders of previous people's work. Okay, and if I give you examples here, so EFT, or tapping emotional freedom technique, was developed a long time ago by Gary Craig. I mean, it's certainly 30 years old at least. He was a Stanford trained engineer. He came from engineering, and he developed this system which he thought might change sort of impulses in the system. He was thinking systematically, and by and large, EFT is a really profound tool. And I know when I learned it, probably about 15, maybe even longer, 15, maybe 20 years ago, I was astounded because nothing in my scientific training could explain that. Now, he used, as I've said, the tapping, he built actually on another therapy called TFT, which was thought field therapy, but he thought a lot of the protocol there was unnecessary, and he simplified it to create EFT. So that's Gary Craig. And then we had Francine Shapiro, who experimented in the 1990s. In fact, 1991, I think she invented EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a bit of a mouthful. And she wondered if movements of the eyes could stimulate memory into resolving itself in new ways, because she had noticed walking in the woods one day after a very difficult cancer diagnosis, very shocking situation for her, that coming back she felt calmer, and she experimented with that. And so she coined the term EMDR. She's since said she would probably call it something else because it's a little bit unwieldy. And that seems to have been thoroughly researched now and brought into the mainstream. It's become part of clinical treatment for people with PTSD and other forms of trauma. And both of those things actually share something in common, where they establish a before and an after with a subjective unit of distress. So you ask the client, when you think or remember that situation, how strong does it feel, 0 to 10, where 10 is the strongest? And you get that measurement before, then after you've done whatever treatment you're going to apply. And so they have a couple of similarities, even though one uses touch and the other uses eye movements. And then, of course, there's havening, invented by brothers Ronald and Stephen Rudin in the early sort of teens, the 2000s, so 2011, 2012. He's a US doctor and neuroscientist. He was actually an organic chemist as his first degree, interestingly. And he really wanted to establish the underlying neurobiology and find out why touch was so profound. And of course, he kind of looked at it that touch stimulates a release of hormones, serotonin, oxytocin, and also the delta waves in the brain, which he has sort of looked at, and you can actually track that now on a phone app and see the different wave patterns in your brain, and it certainly seems to be the case, although there is unfortunately not yet a huge wealth of research, but it's coming, and you can find it on havening.org, which is a really good website. But that, of course, also builds on the backs of the other two therapies, I think. And, you know, all of them seem to use a response in the body to a psychosensory input. So a sensory sight, sound, or touch input. There's also actually hearing, which I haven't talked about much, but you can do brainwave alterations with something called binaural beats, which is where you have a different frequency in each ear. So they all use a sensory input to change the output, a conditioned response like a phobia or a fear. And it seems very immediate and permanent as far as I can see. Now, if it doesn't work for you initially, it may be that there are other aspects to the memory that need to be addressed. And it's worth exploring that with a therapist. It could also be that you're not in the right frame of mind at this point. Maybe you're not openly aware or willing to go to places that trouble you. And I think that's often the case with people who come for therapy. They may come for reasons of they want to fix it and get to the end point, and that's the wrong awareness. Unfortunately, I find many people who are highly driven A types come with that kind of expectation. They just want to get it fixed. You kind of have to be absolutely willing to go to places that are painful, but only temporarily. And once you've been there and evoked the feeling, most of these psychosensory therapies then ask you to clear your mind, because you don't want to be re-evoking and re-traumatizing yourself. You want to be able to let it go and then just concentrate on the distraction or alternative stimulation, which is kind of rewiring the neuronal connections. So we understand that there are new methods here for people to learn a new conditioned response, if you like. Looking at a phobia. So a phobia is usually imprinted because something overwhelmed and scared you. It could be throwing up, emetophobia. It could be going out into public, agoraphobia. It could be a fear of driving or bridges or clocks. It could be anything that at some point has got laid down as an implicit memory of threat in your brain. And what we want to do actually is, we can't change the event that happened, but we can change the emotional response. So we de-link those two. And that's what we're doing. And the question's often been asked, can you do it with cravings, for instance? Well, Ronald Rudin wrote a fantastic book called The Craving Brain. I mean, this was his first book before The Past is Always Present. And yes, he said that these conditioned responses can be absolutely de-linked. And indeed, I've had that experience myself with tapping, which I did on my overwhelming conditioned response to eating certain sweets or chocolates. Now, as a kid, often we're given a lot of positive reinforcement that sweet things are a treat and they are pleasurable. And that certainly happened in my childhood. And what I wanted to do was kind of stop that from happening, because it was causing me to overeat and eat things that weren't good for me. And just 2 rounds of EFT after sniffing, we use smell, in fact, sniffing my favorite sweet treat, I found actually after doing it, I no longer had the craving, and I've never eaten them since. It's very astonishing when you realize that most of the things that we do are emotional, and they have these kind of memory-based basis for the behavior. So I want you to explore the ideas that I'm presenting here. And I also want the community to be a little bit more generous in their willingness to share. There are so many good resources out there, but I'd like to get away from this idea that we have to do things in a certain way, and maybe explore a little bit more of that intuitive understanding of what healing really is. Now, if this was helpful to you, please do get in touch. If you'd like to join me, you can find me on alchemytherapies.co.uk, where I run community sessions each month and also one-to-one therapy and group sessions too. Take care, everybody. Bye for now. Bye.
Hey, hope you enjoyed listening to Rebel Health Radio. Do subscribe and look forward to catching you soon.